Hello and welcome to Reps to GOG.
Long time no see, Jake.
Nanobreaker is a video game produced and developed by Konami Computer Entertainment and released in the US on February 18th, 2005. One thing that may stick out immediately among the video gamers of the world is that Nanobreaker was produced by none other than John Igavania. For those not in the know, Koji Igarashi is basically responsible for all of the greatest modern Castlevania games, so much so that pretty much every game spearheaded by Igarashi that follows the Symphony of the Night formula would be lovingly described as an Igavania. With Iga, which he's often credited as being in such a prominent role for this video game, many would expect there to be similarities between Nanobreaker and an Igarashi-style Castlevania, and they'd be correct. While I won't dwell on the kind of this versus that type commentary that you may expect to follow such a statement, it'd be impossible to talk about this game without comparing it somewhat to its predecessors. I mean, the game was built on the engine that was used to create Castlevania Lament of Innocence, which was released not even a full year prior to Nanobreaker. With that said, let's get cracking. Nanobreaker is a futuristic hack-and-slash RPG in a similar vein to that of Devil May Cry. You will play the role of Jake Warren, otherwise known as Jake the Genocide Hero. If a name like that doesn't pique your interest, I frankly do not know what will. The long and short of it is that Jake is a prototype android super soldier. He fought violently and effectively and may have committed one or two, or just way too many war crimes. The world called for justice against Jake, and instead of putting Jake to death for these crimes, as public outcry called for, the military put him on ice indefinitely. I mean, he is a very effective weapon. 10 years pass and now there's a problem, one that calls for awakening the genocide hero from his decade-long slumber. You see, while Jake was taking his chilly nap, scientific improvement has been soaring unfettered. As part of a nanotechnology initiative, the American government had created an island which was dedicated to the creation and research of nanomachines. They were able to create wondrous nanomachines that could rebuild cells and drastically improve the lives of anyone who had them. They were eventually released to the public, and by the time Jake was needed, just about everyone had them. While I question the effectiveness and ethics of having a main computer that controls all of these nanomachines, such a thing exists in the world of Nanobreaker, and said computer is on the fritz. The nanomachines have gone berserk, and by feeding on the iron contained within the blood of their hosts, they're able to create oil to keep them energized, and thus are able to self-replicate infinitely. In doing so, the host human is violently transformed into what is known as an orgamech, or a mechanical organism. Orgamechs are completely composed of nanomachines, even as far down as the molecular level. Traditional weapons don't work on these baddies, as they are able to fluidly change the composition of their body in reaction to attacks. Even the finest edge of a blade wouldn't be able to break the nanomachines apart. This is where Jake comes in. General Raymond, the officer who decided to unfreeze Jake and the one he answered to back in his soldiering days, has outfitted Jake with a plasma blade, one capable of destroying matter even at the molecular level. Jake, with his new, really cool sword, is now being dispatched to the island that houses the main computer so that he can rescue a scientist who will be able to shut it down, and thus end the orgamech crisis before it can spread beyond the island. And this is where we begin our journey. After being dropped into the city via helicopter, you'll have a chance to play around with the controls. Jake can swing his plasma blade horizontally with the square button and vertically with the triangle button. Horizontal attacks tend to be a bit faster while dealing less damage than compared to the Verti boys. Did I mention that the plasma blade can morph into other shapes? This means that Jake can use his sword as a whip to yank orgamechs to their early demise, among other things. Before diving deeper into the intricacies of the controls, you may have noticed the explosive, gushing red fluids flying from the orgamechs as Jake slices through them. This is very specifically noted as being oil. It's never referenced as blood. Even in interviews, when grilled about it, Iga sticks to the script. You're even given the option to change the color of the oil. There are a bunch of different options. Look, Metal Gear Rising, Danganronpa, iconic 1979 horror film Alien. This makes publications like Games Radar referring to Nanobreaker in articles like Top 10 Bloodiest Games You've Never Played a bit silly. I promise when the Repstugog Top 10 lists start rolling out, the Repstugog Top 10 Oiliest Video Games You May Have Played article will feature Nanobreaker among the greats such as Turmoil, Noida, Cooking Mama, and Hakan from Street Fighter. This little counter at the bottom of your screen displays how many gallons of oil you've spilt thus far. Every 2,000 you hit nets you bonuses or upgrades to your health bar or booster gauge. The booster gauge is a resource that you will use to activate collectible power-ups called boosters. These do anything from allowing you to execute Orgamex with your plasma whip with more ease, reflect projectiles, and summon orbiters to help you keep DPS up, among other things. You can also press the R1 button in tandem with the square or triangle button to do a thrust attack or juggle attack respectively. Thrusting attacks tend to lead to combos that do a good amount of damage, and juggle attacks send your opponent flying up in the air as part of their combos. If you spill enough oil within a time frame, you'll take off your limiter and don a pair of wings. This allows certain small strings of combos to kill enemies instantly. Combos are unlocked in Nanobreaker by collecting various chips of ascending level. In the combo menu, you can insert chips that you collect into these nodes that match the level of the chip, allowing you to further expand your fighting techniques. You won't find enough chips to fully unlock all the combos during your playthrough. Luckily, you're able to slot and unslot them as you wish. This means that if there's a particular combo that you think will be more helpful for a given scenario, you can switch to it on the fly. This also allows you to have a good amount of control over your playstyle, but it's not without its flaws. More on that later. Running around and fighting feels pretty good. Combos feel pretty nice to pull off, and ripping people into you and bisecting them is frankly awesome. There are a few quirks though. Nanobreaker was built on the engine that Castlevania Lament of Innocence used, and you can really tell. While it's not, say, Castlevania 64 levels of jank, the jank is still there. Any platforming that the game expects you to do is either infuriating or slightly annoying at best. Anytime you jump or dodge roll in Nanobreaker, there's a bunch of end lag on the animation, which really breaks up the flow of things. This kind of thing would be fine within the setting of Lament of Innocence, but given Nanobreaker's over-the-top and extreme motif, I gotta say, it detracts a little. That said, you're not really ever incentivized to jump in combat unless you're trying to dodge an attack, because your options for attacking the air are actually pretty limited. This is surprising because 1, you have a launching attack that sends people flying into the air, and 2, there are flying enemies in the game that you'll need to jump to damage. This means that you'll be extensively using your plasma whip to force enemies to fight you on your terms. I'm of the opinion that the plasma whip was the single greatest decision that was made in terms of gameplay. It allows you to keep control of the chaos that is going to be constantly surrounding you. During combat, Orgamex will constantly spawn around you until you kill a specific amount of them, so this is paramount to your success. I know it's a bit of a tired topic in the year of our Lord 2021, but the biggest enemy you'll face in Nanobreaker is the camera. The camera controls are sluggish and unresponsive. If you happen to be in a tight corridor or near a wall, which there are many of, and you have the audacity to turn your camera to try to see your enemies, the camera will cram itself against the wall and point straight at the ground. The only thing that even slightly saves it from being completely terrible is the inclusion of the minimap. The minimap at least allows you to know where you are in relation to your enemies so that you can yank them to a point where you can see them or just try to approximate a slash in their direction. For a change of pace, I'd like to talk a little bit about map design. You can really tell that Nanobreaker is an EGA game because of the way the map is laid out. As you work your way through the beginning of the game, you'll find yourself in a centralized hub area. Despite having a particularly annoying song, you'll find yourself coming back here multiple times throughout the game. Nanobreaker's levels are pretty linearly designed, so just as you're about to sigh and backtrack to return to the centralized area, you'll unlock a shortcut that'll spit you back out where you need to be, and rather breathe a breath of relief. That said, the actual map that you're given is very annoying. It's segmented by area in the overworld, and you're able to jump in and check out the local map for any area you've already been to. Because the overworld is an intricate web of ups and downs and shortcuts back to base, the overworld map kinda looks like a mess, although that's not even my biggest complaint. The overworld gives you a little blip to represent your objective, but it doesn't tell you where you are. Have you ever looked at a map? Knowing where Harrisburg is doesn't do squat for me if I can't find my current location to start with. While you may know where you are and where you need to be, the actual level design is a little rough to say the least. It's filled with a lot of samey and windy corridors. Multiple times I've gone through a corridor, fought some orgamechs, checked the map, walked towards what I thought was progression, only to realize, wait, I've been here before. That being said, the map and the game is pretty small, so once you've played through it once, these stumbling blocks tend to fade away. Now the minimap, that's a blessing. The minimap tells you where enemies are in relation to you and which way you're facing. Knowing that an orgamech spawned behind me and knowing exactly in which direction I need to turn so that I can plasma whip him based solely on the minimap context alone is fresh, and it makes the overworld map look stale by comparison. This implementation already exists in one facet of the game, so its omittance from another is particularly rough. What's not rough, however, is the design of the orgamechs and also the bosses. Well, to an extent. Most enemies on your first playthrough are going to have just one attack that they do. This is changed when you unlock hard mode and they gain access to more attacks, such as this extendo arm attack. This is fine because in any given room they'll just keep spawning until you've killed the amount of them the room is programmed to spawn in. You're rarely ever fighting just one enemy, so them having one attack is not really a problem. While I do have my favorites like these brutish shield orgamechs or the spider orgamechs that have a plethora of different attacks, my favorite part of the enemy design is how they react to the Genocide Heroes attacks. Certain strings of combos have different effects on different enemies. Like if you use an attack that would cut any other orgamech in half against the shield orgamech, you instead cut their shields off and they start spewing acidic oil out of the holes where the shields used to be. Or how these roly orgamechs can't be damaged unless you first knock them into the air with a juggle attack. Small things like this keep you on your toes and force you to mix things up. The reason for my hesitation at the beginning of this statement was the fact that you straight up don't have to fight most of the enemies in this game. I've been trying really hard not to compare Nanobreaker to Devil May Cry, but I think it's high time to pull the devil trigger. Almost always, without fail, in Devil May Cry, when you walk into a room, you will be locked in that room until all of the enemies are defeated. In fact, I would go as far as to say that most rooms in Nanobreaker can just be ran through. What do you gain from fighting regular monsters? You gain health upgrades and special meter upgrades. That's it. Once you've practiced your combos enough and had your fill of fighting said enemies, there's not really much point in fighting them. In a game like, say, Symphony of the Night, for one, most enemies are just harder to run past due to the 2D nature of the game, but you also have a reason to fight them in that they drop items that increase your power or toughness or unlock interesting weapons. Literally anything besides a glorified XP bar would have made me want to actually fight the orgamechs in Nanobreaker, but alas. That said, the bosses in the game are actually super cool. I would separate them into two categories, spectacle bosses and traditional bosses. A spectacle boss would be something where the actual fighting takes a backseat to a more puzzle-esque fight. You need to use your resources to understand the gimmick of the boss and then exploit them. A traditional boss would be more like your Alucards and your Ganondorfs, with more fighting and reacting to attack patterns and thinking on your feet. The spectacle bosses in Nanobreaker are fun in their own way because most of them involve using the plasma whip creatively in some way or another, and I'm gonna be honest, I really love the plasma whip. Whether it be dodging giant orgamech claws and using them as cover for giant lasers, or yanking the heart out of Metal Gear Ray here once you get him to open his ribcage, it's really cool. Traditional bosses such as the Keith fights are also really fun because they put you on level playing ground with your adversary. Keith is a cyborg soldier just like you. You'll fight him multiple times and it's a treat every single time. He has everything you have plus more. If you try to hit him with your plasma whip in a predictable way, he'll dodge it and use his own plasma whip to yank you at him for free hits. His own specialty attacks are also really fun to interact with. If he whips out his machine gun, you need to be able to instantly drop everything and start running to dodge the bullets. He also has a giant fuck-off laser sword attack, which, while frame-droppy, is some of the coolest shit this game has to offer. So while the bosses are all good in their own unique way, they all suffer from something that is completely beyond the scope of the boss fights themselves. Remember however many minutes ago when I mentioned the combo system's flaws? Now's the time for that. The combos you gain are very stylish, they're flashy and do interesting things. There are a few issues with the combat system in my eyes though. the first of which is really elucidated by the spectacle boss fights that I mentioned. Most combos don't do as much sustained damage as spamming the triangle button for 3 button strings. It seems like most combos are meant for fighting large throngs of enemies, such as the hammer combo that flattens enemies in a huge area, or the scythe combo that cuts in half every enemy in a wide arc. While there is a really cool spear combo that seems to be meant for a single target attack, and it does do more damage than spamming the triangle button, it also puts you in a lengthy, uncancelable animation, which can be devastating if you're in the middle of a DPS phase of a spectacle boss and it decides it's time to change phases in the middle of your combo. Even if you were to try to use these combos against Keith, it's likely he'll just knock you out of it mid-string because it takes too long. This could be remedied if there were more combos and they bumped the numbers up slightly to reward the player for pulling off an 8-button combo. The system of slotting in chips to unlock different combos is interesting, but it honestly homogenizes gameplay. Putting a bunch of points into one combo, then having to slot and unslot them every single time you want to access a new combo is annoying. The plasma blade is meant to be able to shift into different weapons. When you're slotting points in, you're essentially slotting them into the hammer, the scythe, or the spear. Or the boomerang, which is super cool yet underutilized. I wish Nanobreaker had instead utilized these upgrade chips in a more traditional Igavania way, where instead of switching out combos, you're switching out weapons. Have the chips unlock and upgrade these weapons instead of spending a whole bunch of chips unlocking 1 or 2 combos that implement said weapon. That way you could really play with the fluidity of the plasma blade and also provide more combos for the player to experiment with. The combos are gratifying to pull off and fun to use. I just wish this was a facet of the game that was leaned into further. I will say that despite having some samey corridors and tight spaces that hamper gameplay because of the camera, Nanobreaker has some pretty cool areas and puzzles in the game. The entire island is being parasitically feasted upon by these massive lumps of nanomachines all over the place, and it's very depressing. When you get into the giant computer obelisk area, there's a puzzle that involves aligning colored doors with a cube in the middle, and it's very interesting. The only segment of the game that I'd like to throw in here and complain about, because I'm a hack and couldn't find another place to complain about these in the script, is these stupid escort missions. I cannot believe that they had the absolute gall to put not 1 but 2 of these in the game. Nanobreaker is not a game that is about precision and nuance. It's a game about sweeping generalization and bad actors. Wait, this isn't debate class. Whatever, it still fits. Your attacks are all giant sweeping arcs that hit a lot of things at once because you're meant to be fighting multiple things at once. So when you have an escort mission where you have to lead this scientist to another place, it's hard to hit the Orgamex without hitting her. It's possible, it's just really annoying and counter to the game's normal gameplay style. And get this, you can damage her with your attacks. You can kill the person that you're escorting and have to start all over again. I have no idea who made this, tried it out, and was like, huh, yeah, this is really good. Let's throw in another escort mission exactly like it later. But I want to find that man and have a 3 a.m. discussion with him about his views on the state of the world. Anyway, yeah, I just had to get that off my chest. This is the portion of the video where I spoil the entire plot, so go ahead and skip ahead if you care about that sort of thing. I'll give the timestamp here. Picking up where we left off before, you're dropped onto the island with one mission: to save the scientist and help her shut off the computer that caused all these nanomachines to go haywire. You'll eventually meet her name being Michelle Baker. This is where you'll get your first real taste of Jake the Genocide Hero's personality.
You are the one, right? The scientist the military sent here.
Yes, I am. And you are?
I've been sent to assist you.
He is essentially a walking rendition of your mom's Thursday night buttered spaghetti. That is to say, he is painfully uncharacterized. I assume that they're trying to convey a cool and thoughtful character, but it just falls flat in his dialogue.
My mission is to protect you.
How can I possibly trust someone who indiscriminately kills women and children?
Regardless, Jake needs to do a few errands for Michelle, thus the central hub type area I spoke of earlier. You'll eventually meet Keith, who is another cyborg soldier who fought alongside Jake in the war. He tells Jake that they've got a score to settle and promptly fights you.
Don't you hate me for what I did to you? After all, I'm the reason 7 years of your life got iced.
You'll come across him multiple times as he tries to stop you from destroying the Orgamex. Eventually we learn through these battles that Jake never actually killed any civilians in the war. It was all Keith's doing. Jake was just framed for doing it.
Civilian or not, I killed more humans than you ever did.
As you continue, you're eventually able to locate the computer that was controlling the Orgamex, which was a giant head on top of a massive obelisk towering over the city, might I add. I do not know how it was that hard to find. Regardless, you fight the computer, and as you're about to deal the killing blow, General Raymond, the guy who brought you on this mission in the first place, betrays you, taking Michelle hostage and absorbing the computer into himself. He had set this whole thing in motion in order to take control of the Orgamex and become unstoppable. He knew that Jake or Keith would be able to gain access to the computer, which was lodged inside the giant hostile head, so he pitted them against each other. You kill an empowered General Raymond, and then you, Michelle, and her father drive off in a convertible to a lighthearted and zany ending sequence.
So, what do you think, huh? Not too shabby for an old guy.
I forgot to mention one thing.
What's that?
Bridge up ahead? It's gone.
If it seems like I'm rushing through this, it's because 1, I am, and 2, the game itself is very skimpy on the story front. This ending sequence is really what cemented in me that I did not enjoy my time with this story. These characters don't deserve this fanfare at the end. We've spent so little time with them, and man of few and dull words, Jake did not convince me that he built any rapport with them outside his actions that we were taking to complete the plot of the story. After completing the story, you will have access to a few new modes: Splatter Mode, Hard Mode, and Keith Mode. Splatter Mode is a series of different levels where your mission is to spill as much oil as possible to get a high score. It's actually pretty cool. Nanobreaker had an online leaderboard where you could get a high score on your game and get a code for that high score, and then input that code on an official website for the game to get your name on that leaderboard. Hard Mode is a harder version of the game where enemies will have different attack patterns, take less damage, and deal more damage. Keith Mode actually allows you to play as Keith. He actually has less combos than Jake, but in return he's able to use his special moves from the game, which allows you to breeze through most of it. The missiles in the gun are a super fun way to reward the player for beating the game. It's a shame they didn't give the player the ability to use the fuck-off laser sword though. After you beat the game as Keith, you'll unlock Jaguar from Neo Contra for the PlayStation 2. Jaguar plays exactly like Jake, except he's faster, attacks faster, and does more damage. But he has a very tiny health bar, a glass cannon so to speak. I actually played my hard mode playthrough on this character, and it was pretty fun having a good amount of power but only being able to take 1 or 2 hits before I died. All in all, I think I want to enjoy Nanobreaker, but it's just too awkward in its implementation of most things for me to really get into it. It has some awesome battle cutscenes and fun bosses. The setting is pretty interesting, and the characters, despite some of them being wet noodles, are pretty interestingly designed. Would I recommend you play Nanobreaker? It's a hard sell, but I think yes. It's very interesting to see the core philosophies from the Castlevania team bleed into this game, and it's interesting to see where they went and what they learned from Lament of Innocence. I definitely think there's some fun to be had despite its flaws. I'd like to just take a moment and thank the glorious people over at my Patreon. Keep on keeping on. If you'd like to check that out, you can get early access to my scripts, watch the video a day early, and I also provide copies of my save files whenever I review a game. I also have a Discord server and a Twitter. If you want to be notified about new releases, those are the places to be. Thanks for watching.